He wasn't a senator, or a congressman. He didn't even graduate from college. Yet somehow, Charlie Kirk built a movement that reached all the way into the halls of power. At just 18, he turned his back on the classroom, and instead set out to reshape it, armed with nothing more than a microphone, a vision, and a burning belief that America's campuses had lost their way. To some, he was a fearless defender of free speech, giving a voice to conservative students who felt silenced. To others, he was a provocateur, fueling division, misinformation, and outrage. But here's the question: how did a teenager from suburban Illinois transform from a dropout into one of the most polarizing figures in American politics, only to meet a violent end on the very stage where his story began? This is From Campus to Congress, the story of Charlie Kirk. Brought to you by Myriad Stories Hub. Charlie Kirk was born in 1993, in the quiet suburb of Arlington Heights, Illinois. His father worked in architecture, his mother in marketing, and their home carried the steady rhythms of a middle-class, church-anchored family. On the surface, it was an ordinary upbringing. But even as a boy, Charlie seemed restless, drawn more to questions of culture and politics than to childhood distractions. At Prospect High School, he developed a reputation for speaking out. While his classmates argued over sports or prom, Charlie was already debating the role of government, the values of free enterprise, and the future of America's youth. His sharp opinions earned him both admiration and suspicion, setting him apart from peers who found politics too heavy for teenage years. One moment shifted everything. As a senior, he wrote an essay for the Chicago Tribune, warning that American schools were tilting too far to the left. That single piece of writing caught the eye of conservative activists, who saw in him not just a teenager with strong opinions, but a spark. One that could ignite a larger movement. Though he enrolled briefly at Harper College, higher education never held his loyalty. For Charlie, the classroom felt less like a place of discovery and more like a battlefield of ideas. And so, just months into his studies, he made the decision that would define his life: to walk away from the traditional path, and step directly into the fight he believed was waiting for him. In 2012, just 18 years old and fresh out of high school, Charlie Kirk made a decision that few understood at the time. While his friends were unpacking dorm rooms and buying textbooks, he was sketching plans for a new kind of movement. With the encouragement of Bill Montgomery, a retired businessman who became his mentor, Kirk co-founded Turning Point USA. Its mission was simple but bold: to challenge what he believed was the overwhelming liberal dominance on America's campuses. At first, it was just a handful of folding tables and printed flyers. Kirk and his small team traveled from college to college, often facing empty stares, ridicule, and more than once, outright hostility. Yet he persisted, refining his message, sharpening his arguments, and leaning into a strategy that mixed confrontation with charisma. Every clash, every debate, was a stage to amplify his presence. The breakthrough came when donors began to notice. Wealthy conservatives, impressed by his audacity, opened their checkbooks. With new funding, Turning Point USA grew rapidly, recruiting chapters on campuses across the country. What had started as a grassroots experiment was transforming into a national network of young conservatives. Then came the move that put Kirk squarely in the spotlight: the Professor Watch List. A controversial online database of professors accused of pushing leftist agendas. To his supporters, it was accountability. To his critics, it was intimidation. But one thing was clear: Charlie Kirk had found his formula. Confrontation, controversy, and visibility. With the launch of The Charlie Kirk Show and regular appearances on Fox News, his voice reached beyond the Quad and into millions of American homes. What began as a campus crusade was becoming something larger, a platform powerful enough to influence the national conversation. By the late 2010s, Charlie Kirk had become more than just a campus activist. Turning Point USA had chapters in hundreds of universities, hosting massive student conferences that drew thousands. Bright lights, giant screens, and roaring crowds of young conservatives transformed what began as folding tables into full-scale political rallies. For a generation searching for a voice on campus, Charlie Kirk provided one. His influence reached beyond the student body. The White House began to notice. During the Trump administration, Kirk's name was no longer just whispered in college hallways. It was being spoken in the highest circles of power. His organizations became pipelines for conservative youth to enter national politics. He was photographed with senators, governors, and even the president himself. In just a few years, the dropout had become a kingmaker. But with visibility came backlash. Critics accused Kirk of spreading misinformation, particularly during the pandemic, when his organization downplayed the seriousness of COVID-19. Later, his public embrace of false claims about the 2020 election sparked outrage, casting him as not just a campus provocateur but a national firebrand. Universities pushed back, professors fought to shut down his events, and protesters often greeted him wherever he spoke. Inside his own movement, challenges simmered too. Some accused him of being more focused on building his personal brand than on fostering thoughtful debate. Others worried that his relentless push for controversy was deepening America's political divide rather than bridging it. Yet through every storm, Kirk doubled down, framing the criticism as proof of his impact. At his peak, he stood as one of the most polarizing figures in American politics, hailed as a defender of free speech by some, condemned as a dangerous agitator by others. For Charlie Kirk, the line between influence and infamy was not a boundary to fear, but a battlefield to embrace. By the early 2020s, Charlie Kirk was no longer just the face of a youth movement. He had built an empire. Turning Point USA extended its reach into high schools, churches, and even local politics. With spin-off arms like Turning Point Action and Piazza Faith, Kirk blurred the lines between activism, religion, and raw political power. His message was no longer confined to the classroom, it was filling stadiums and echoing through the corridors of Congress. To his supporters, his legacy was undeniable. He gave young conservatives the courage to stand openly, to challenge professors, to speak up in environments they believed were stacked against them. He crafted a blueprint for mobilizing an entire generation, transforming college students into activists, influencers, and political operatives. But to his critics, his legacy was darker. They saw a man who thrived on outrage, who simplified complex issues into viral sound bites, and who normalized extreme rhetoric in the pursuit of attention. For them, Kirk wasn't building bridges, he was burning them. And then came the tragedy that would freeze his story in place. In September of 2025, during a campus event in Utah, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed while addressing students. In an instant, the young man who had dedicated his life to fighting battles on college campuses met his end on one. His death reignited the same debates that defined his life. Was Charlie Kirk a visionary who reshaped American politics, or a provocateur who left it more divided than ever? One thing remains certain: his story, brief as it was, proved that you don't have to sit in Congress to change the direction of a nation. He began with nothing more than a belief that America's classrooms were broken, and ended with a movement that reached the highest seats of power. Love him or loathe him, Charlie Kirk proved that a single voice, amplified with conviction, could echo from campus quads all the way to Congress. But his story leaves us with a haunting question: when influence is built on conflict, does it inspire lasting change, or only deeper division? This has been From Campus to Congress, brought to you by Myriad Stories Hub. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next untold journey shaping the world we live in today.